My name is Carla, and at 35 years old, I never imagined my own brother would try to kill me over our childhood home. Dad had only been gone 3 months when Daniel showed up with his wife and those papers. I still remember the weight of his boot on my chest as blood pooled beneath my head on our father's hardwood floors. The sound of Vanessa's voice still haunts me. "Do it, Daniel. End her." I was certain I would die in the house Dad worked his entire life to keep for us. Before I share what happened that day and how everything changed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family turn on you when money was involved. The two-story Craftsman house on Maple Street had been our family home since before I was born. Dad purchased it when he married Mom, dreaming of filling it with children and laughter. For a while, it was exactly that. Daniel and I grew up racing through the long hallway that connected the front door to the kitchen, playing hide and seek in the numerous closets and spending summers in the backyard, where Dad built us a treehouse that seemed like a castle to our young eyes. But the perfect family image cracked when I was 8 and Daniel was 10. Mom left without warning, packing a single suitcase while we were at school. Dad never spoke badly about her, just told us she needed to find herself and that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love. Years later, I learned she'd run off with her yoga instructor to start a new life in California. She never called, never wrote, never sent birthday cards. It was as if we had ceased to exist for her. Dad shouldered the burden of single parenthood with quiet determination. He worked at the local manufacturing plant, often taking double shifts to keep up with the mortgage payments. "This house is our anchor," he would say. "No matter what storms come, we always have a safe harbor." I believed him with the unquestioning faith of childhood. As we grew older, Daniel and I developed different relationships with Dad. I stayed close, helping with household bills from the time I was 16, working at the local grocery store after school. When Dad's arthritis started acting up, I was the one who took him to doctor appointments and made sure he took his medications. Daniel, meanwhile, focused on his education and career. He was always smart, earning a scholarship to a prestigious business school 3 states away. The distance wasn't just geographical. With every visit home, he seemed to grow more impatient with our father's simple lifestyle. "You could sell this place and get something more modern, more manageable," Daniel would suggest during holiday visits. Dad would just smile and say, "Why would I trade a home for a house?" After college, Daniel transformed completely. The brother who once shared ice cream with me on the front porch steps became a man obsessed with status and financial success. He landed a job at a financial consulting firm in the city, bought expensive suits, and rarely called home. When he did visit, he'd spend most of the time on his phone, conducting business deals or checking stock prices. Then Daniel met Vanessa at a corporate fundraiser. She was striking with her perfect blonde hair, tailored clothing, and the kind of confidence that commanded attention. The first time he brought her to meet Dad, she walked through our home with barely concealed disdain, asking if the vintage fixtures were original or reproduction. She pronounced our family photographs quaint and suggested Dad might enjoy an assisted living community she knew about that had wonderful amenities for seniors. Their wedding was lavish, held at an exclusive country club. Dad and I felt out of place among Daniel's new circle of friends and colleagues. I wore my best dress, purchased on sale, at a department store, while Vanessa's bridesmaids were draped in designer gowns that cost more than 3 months of my salary. Dad gave a heartfelt toast that made me cry, but seemed to embarrass Daniel. Later, I overheard Vanessa telling someone that Dad's speech was sweet but rambling. You know how older people can be. After the wedding, Daniel visited even less frequently. When Dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer 3 years ago, I made the decision to move back home to care for him. I took a leave of absence from my job as an administrative assistant at the local elementary school where I had worked for 8 years. The principal was understanding, assuring me my position would be waiting when I was ready to return. Daniel called when I told him about Dad's diagnosis, promised to visit soon, but weeks passed. When he finally came, he stayed less than 2 hours, explaining he had an important meeting the next morning. Dad never complained, but I saw the hurt in his eyes when Daniel rushed out the door with a quick pat on his shoulder instead of a proper hug. As Dad's condition worsened, I became his full-time caregiver. Days blended into nights of medication schedules, doctor appointments, and eventually hospice care in our living room. Daniel called occasionally, but always had an excuse for why he couldn't visit. The market's volatile right now, or we're in the middle of a big acquisition. Vanessa never called at all. 2 weeks before Dad passed, during a rare, lucid moment, free from pain medication, he took my hand and spoke the words that would later become the center of so much conflict. "Carla, I want you to have the house," he said, his voice weak but determined. "You've been here. You understand what this place means. Daniel has his own life now, his own priorities. Promise me you'll keep our home." I promised, tears streaming down my face. The next day he had his lawyer come to the house to update his will. I didn't know the details then, only that he seemed more peaceful afterward. When Dad died, I felt as though the foundation of my world had crumbled. I sat in his empty room for hours, surrounded by the artifacts of his life. The worn leather wallet, on the dresser, reading glasses, folded neatly beside his favorite mystery novel. The old flannel robe hanging on the back of the door. The house seemed to hold its breath as if waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel arrived for the funeral with Vanessa in tow. For a brief moment as we stood beside the grave, I felt united with my brother in grief. He put his arm around my shoulders as we watched the casket being lowered, and I caught a glimpse of the boy who had once been my playmate and protector. Vanessa stood slightly apart, checking her watch discreetly, her black designer dress, and oversized sunglasses, making her look like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine rather than a family gathering. That fleeting moment of connection with Daniel dissolved almost immediately after the funeral reception. As guests were leaving, he cornered me in the kitchen. "We should talk about the house," he said, his voice businesslike. "I think the smartest move would be to sell. The real estate market in this area is hot right now." "I'm not selling," I replied, surprised by his timing. Dad wanted me to keep it. A flicker of something cold passed across his face before he composed himself. "We'll discuss it later," he said, walking away to join Vanessa, who was waiting impatiently by the door. I didn't realize then that this brief exchange was just the first rumble of the earthquake that would eventually shatter what remained of our family. 2 weeks after the funeral, we met with Dad's attorney, Lloyd Peterson, a kind-faced man in his 60s who had been Dad's friend since high school. Lloyd's office was modest, but professional, with law books lining the walls and family photographs on his desk. Daniel and Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, both dressed in business attire that seemed excessive for our small-town setting. Lloyd began by expressing his condolences before opening the file containing Dad's will. The terms were straightforward. The house was left to me with the stipulation that I would pay Daniel his fair share of the property's value over a 5-year period, interest-free. Dad's savings would be split equally between us, and his personal possessions were to be divided as we saw fit. I watched Daniel's face carefully as Lloyd read the will. His expression remained neutral, but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. Vanessa, sitting beside him in a crisp white blouse and black pencil skirt, shifted in her seat and crossed her legs, her designer shoe bouncing impatiently. "Is there any provision for selling the property instead?" Daniel asked when Lloyd finished. Your father specified his preference that Carla retain ownership, Lloyd replied. But legally, once the assets are transferred, Carla would have the right to sell if she chose to. Daniel nodded, glancing at Vanessa, who gave him a barely perceptible nod in return. Well, that seems straightforward enough, Daniel said, his voice pleasant. I think we can work with this arrangement. After signing the necessary documents, Daniel suggested we all go to lunch. I was surprised, but agreed, hoping this might be the beginning of a more cordial relationship. We went to Antonio's dad's favorite Italian restaurant, where the owner greeted me with a hug and condolences. Over pasta, Daniel maintained casual conversation, asking about my plans now that I was back in town permanently. Vanessa remained largely silent, picking at her salad and checking her phone frequently. As coffee was served, Daniel leaned forward. I've been thinking, Carla. It might be easier for everyone if we just sold the house. You could buy something smaller, more manageable, and we could settle the financial aspect immediately, rather than dragging it out for 5 years. I promised Dad I'd keep the house, I said firmly. It's not just a building to me, Daniel. It's our family home. Sentimentality is expensive, Vanessa interjected, speaking for the first time since we'd ordered. And honestly, that house needs significant updating. The kitchen is practically vintage and not in a good way. I felt my face grow hot. The house is well maintained. Dad took pride in it. Of course he did, Daniel said soothingly, shooting Vanessa a warning glance. Just think about it, okay? No pressure. But there was pressure, and it only increased in the weeks that followed. I returned to my job at the school, finding comfort in the familiar routine and the support of my colleagues. One evening, my cousin Patrick called. He lived in the city where Daniel and Vanessa had their condo, and occasionally ran into them at social events. I thought you should know, Patrick said hesitantly. Daniel and Vanessa are having money troubles. I overheard something at James Morton's retirement party last weekend. They bought that luxury condo at the peak of the market, and now it's underwater. Plus, there's talk about Vanessa's shopping habits. Apparently, they're carrying some serious credit card debt. How serious? I asked. 6 figures serious, Patrick replied. And Daniel made some risky investments that didn't pan out. From what I gathered, they're feeling the squeeze. This information cast Daniel's sudden interest in selling the house in a new light. I lived modestly on my school salary, supplemented by the small amount Dad had left me. The house was paid off, so my expenses were manageable. I had no intention of selling the only real home I'd ever known to bail out my brother's financial mismanagement. 2 weeks after our lunch, Daniel called again, his tone less friendly this time. Have you thought more about selling? He asked, without preamble. My answer hasn't changed, Daniel. I'm keeping the house. That's really selfish, Carla, he snapped. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house while I have to wait 5 years for my share. How is that fair? It was Dad's decision, I reminded him. And I took care of him for 3 years while you were too busy to visit more than a handful of times. Don't try to guilt me, Daniel shot back. I was building a career, providing for my family. We can't all put our lives on hold. The conversation ended with Daniel hanging up abruptly. That night, I received a text from Vanessa family should support each other. Your brother deserves better than this treatment. The messages became more frequent. Daniel called almost daily, each conversation more heated than the last. He began bringing up childhood incidents, twisting them to portray himself as the neglected son who had to fight for attention while I was supposedly Dad's favorite. Dad always coddled you, he claimed during one particularly nasty call. He never pushed you to achieve anything beyond your mediocre job at that school. He held you back, and now you're clinging to that house because you've got nothing else. His words stung, but I recognized the manipulation tactic. Daniel had always been charismatic and persuasive, skilled at reshaping narratives to suit his purposes. I refused to be swayed. Then family members began calling me concerned. Aunt Susan said Vanessa had told her I had manipulated Dad during his illness, taking advantage of his weakened state to convince him to leave me the house. Uncle Robert questioned whether I was being fair to Daniel. Even my second cousin Elaine, who I rarely spoke with, sent a Facebook message suggesting I do the right thing and sell the property. I felt increasingly isolated, but I held firm. This was the home where Dad had raised us after Mom abandoned the family. This was where he had taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework at the kitchen table, and later where I had held his hand as he took his final breath. I wasn't going to sell it to satisfy Daniel's creditors. One afternoon I came home from work to find a strange car parked across the street. The driver, a woman in business attire, watched the house intently. When I approached, she drove away quickly. 2 days later, I discovered someone had been inside the house. Nothing was taken, but items were slightly out of place. And I found a business card from a real estate agency tucked under a vase in the living room. I called Daniel immediately. "Did you show a realtor through the house?" "You weren't answering my calls," he replied unapologetically. "I still have Dad's spare key. I thought if you saw some numbers, you might be more reasonable." I was furious. "That's breaking and entering, Daniel. You had no right." "It's partly my house too," he countered. "Dad's will says I own half its value." "Value, not property," I corrected him. "Stay away from my house, or I'll call the police." He laughed. "Go ahead. Tell them your brother used a key to enter the family home he grew up in. See how seriously they take you." I changed the locks the next day. Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. Late-night phone calls became the norm, often with Daniel sounding intoxicated, alternating between pleading and threatening. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," he said during one midnight call. "I will not let you keep what's rightfully mine." I began screening my calls, but this only intensified his anger. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of someone trying the front door handle. Peering through the blinds, I saw Daniel's car parked at the curb, but no sign of him. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the new deadbolt. My friend Alicia urged me to take the threats seriously. "This isn't normal sibling disagreement, Carla." She insisted over coffee at her apartment. "He's escalating. You need to protect yourself." Following her advice, I installed basic security cameras at the front and back doors. I also consulted with a lawyer, Jessica Reyes, about the possibility of a restraining order. "Based on what you've told me, we have grounds," Jessica said, her expression grave. "But family court can be complicated. Judges often want to see evidence of physical threats or violence before issuing orders against family members." "So I have to wait until he hurts me?" I asked incredulously. "Document everything," she advised. "Every call, every text, every incident. Save security footage. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case." I began keeping a detailed log of Daniel's behavior. The entries multiplied quickly, Daniel and Vanessa appearing unannounced at my workplace, causing a scene in the school office that left me humiliated in front of my colleagues. Vanessa telling the school secretary that I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. Daniel leaving threatening voicemails that became increasingly specific about what would happen if I didn't cooperate. My neighbor, Thomas, a retired police officer who lived across the street, approached me one evening as I was collecting my mail. "Carla, I noticed a man inspecting your windows yesterday when you were at work," he said, his weathered face concerned. "Tall fellow, expensive suit. He was checking the locks, testing if they would give." "That sounds like my brother," I replied, my stomach knotting with anxiety. Thomas frowned. "Family or not, that's suspicious behavior. I've seen his car driving by at odd hours too. Would you like me to keep an eye out?" I gratefully accepted his offer, feeling slightly safer knowing someone was watching. Still, I began having trouble sleeping, jumping at every creak and sound in the night. I developed a ritual of checking all doors and windows multiple times before bed, and often woke in the early hours, certain I'd heard someone in the house. The nightmares were the worst. In them, I would be trapped in the house as water rose around me with Daniel outside, holding a key but refusing to unlock the door unless I signed the house over to him. I'd wake gasping sheets, soaked with sweat. Despite my precautions, Daniel found ways to invade my life. One evening, browsing online, I discovered a property listing with interior photographs of my house. The description read, "Coming soon, charming 4-bedroom craftsman in desirable neighborhood. Motivated seller." The listing agent was a colleague of Vanessa's friend. I called the real estate office immediately explaining that the house was not for sale and demanding the listing be removed. The agent was confused, insisting she had proper authorization. It took a formal letter from Jessica threatening legal action to get the listing taken down. Daniel's messages became even more ominous. "I won't ask nicely much longer," read one text. "You can't hide in Dad's house forever," stated another. I considered giving in simply to end the harassment. The constant stress was affecting my health and job performance. The principal had called me in for a concerned chat after I burst into tears during a staff meeting. My blood pressure was elevated at my last doctor's appointment, and I'd lost weight from lack of appetite. But every time I wavered, I remembered Dad's face as he made me promise to keep the house. I remembered the sacrifices he'd made to provide us with stability and security after Mom left. I couldn't betray that promise, not even to buy peace from Daniel's relentless campaign. So I installed more security measures, kept my documentation current, and prepared for whatever might come next. I never imagined just how far Daniel would go. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day Dad would have spent puttering in his garden. I was having coffee on the back porch, enjoying a rare moment of tranquility when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera app on my phone, I saw Daniel and Vanessa standing on the front step. Daniel was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, looking surprisingly composed. Vanessa stood slightly behind him, elegant in a cream-colored pantsuit, a large designer handbag on her arm. Daniel held a leather document folder. My first instinct was to ignore them, but something about Daniel's unusually calm demeanor made me uneasy. I decided it would be better to confront them with the door between us than risk them causing a scene that neighbors might witness. Opening the door partway, security chain still engaged, I said firmly, "You need to leave. I have nothing to say to either of you." "Carla, please," Daniel said, his voice reasonable, almost friendly. "We just want to talk. I think I've found a solution that works for everyone." Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain. They stepped inside Vanessa's high heels, clicking sharply on the hardwood floor of the entryway. Her cold smile never reached her eyes as she surveyed the living room. "You've rearranged things," she observed. "The sofa used to be against that wall." I ignored her comment. "Say what you came to say, then go." Daniel gestured toward the dining table. "Can we sit?" "This will only take a few minutes." I reluctantly led them to the table where Daniel opened his document folder and spread several papers in front of me. They were mortgage transfer documents already filled out with my name. "Here's my proposal," he said, his tone businesslike. "You take out a mortgage on the house for 70% of its current market value. You give me my share now instead of over 5 years, and you keep the house. Everyone wins." "That's not winning for me," I replied. "I'd be paying a mortgage on a house that's already paid for just so you can have cash now instead of later." "Be reasonable," Vanessa interjected. Daniel needs his inheritance now, not in 5 years. This is the perfect compromise. Why do you need the money so urgently? I asked, though I already knew the answer from Patrick. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not relevant. What matters is finding a fair solution. Fair would have been visiting Dad more than twice a year while he was dying, I said, my patience evaporating. Fair would be respecting his wishes instead of harassing me for months. We wouldn't have to harass you if you weren't being so stubborn, Vanessa snapped. Just sign the papers, Carla. We have better things to do than sit here all day. I'm not signing anything, I stated, standing up. Now please leave my house. The change in Daniel was instantaneous and terrifying. The veneer of civility cracked, revealing a rage I'd never seen before. He knocked his chair backward as he stood, sending it crashing to the floor. In 2 quick strides, he was around the table, grabbing my hair with one hand and my arm with the other. You ungrateful little bitch, he snarled, his face inches from mine. You think you can keep playing these games? Before I could react, he slammed me against the wall, knocking a framed family photo to the floor, glass shattering. Pain exploded across my back and shoulders. Daniel, stop, I gasped. But his expression was transformed into someone I didn't recognize. He threw me to the floor with shocking force. My head hit the hardwood with a sickening thud, and for a moment my vision swam with black spots. I felt the warm trickle of blood from where my scalp had split open. Daniel loomed over me, then delivered a vicious kick to my ribs that left me struggling to breathe. Another kick followed, and another. Sign the fucking papers, he demanded, punctuating each word with another blow. Sign, or I'll break every bone in your body. I curled into a protective ball, tasting blood where I'd bitten my cheek. Through tear-blurred vision, I saw Vanessa standing calmly by the table, watching, without expression, as her husband assaulted me. She hadn't moved to help or to stop him. She simply observed like someone watching a mildly interesting television program. Daniel grabbed my hair again, yanking my head up. Last chance, Carla. Sign the papers or things get much worse. Despite the pain radiating through my body, despite the terror, I managed to whisper number. He slammed my head back down onto the floor. You always were stubborn, just like Dad. Look where it got him. Daniel reached for a heavy crystal paperweight on the side table, a gift from Dad's co-workers when he retired. The sunlight caught it as he raised it, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the wall, a beautiful prelude to what I was certain would be devastating damage. That's when I heard Vanessa's voice, cold and precise. Do it, Daniel. End her. She's never going to sign otherwise. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my brother might actually kill me. The brother who had once carried me on his shoulders at the county fair, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me from bullies in elementary school, was now poised to crush my skull over money. And his wife was encouraging him. Blood pooled beneath my head, spreading across the floor. Dad had so carefully refinished the summer before his diagnosis. My vision began to blur at the edges. I wondered if Dad could see this happening in the home he'd loved so much. Then came the sound of the back door opening, followed by a commanding voice, "Stop, police." The voice wasn't actually the police, but it carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Daniel froze the paperweight, still raised above his head. Vanessa whirled around her composed facade, cracking for the first time. Thomas, my retired police officer neighbor, stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his phone held out in front of him, clearly recording. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he surveyed the scene, me bleeding on the floor. Daniel poised to strike Vanessa, standing by. Put it down, Thomas ordered Daniel, his voice steady but forceful. I've already called 911. They'll be here any minute. Daniel lowered the paperweight slowly, his expression shifting from rage to calculation. This isn't what it looks like, he said suddenly. sounding reasonable again. My sister attacked us. She's been unstable since our father died. We were defending ourselves. Thomas didn't lower his phone. Save it for the officers. I've been recording since I heard the commotion. Got most of it on video, including your wife suggesting you end her. Vanessa's face drained of color. You're trespassing, she accused. You can't just walk into someone's home and start recording. That's illegal. Carla gave me a key after she spotted your husband casing the place, Thomas replied calmly. Asked me to check on things if I heard anything concerning. And entering, to prevent what looked like an attempted murder. Any court would call that justified. I tried to sit up, gasping as pain shot through my ribs. Thomas moved cautiously into the room, positioning himself between me and Daniel, still recording. Don't move, Carla, he advised. Ambulance is on the way. Daniel's eyes darted toward the front door, and Thomas shook his head. Don't even think about it. Leaving the scene would just add to the charges. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Vanessa began to cry theatrical sobs that seemed calculated to generate sympathy. This is a family matter, she insisted, between hiccuping breaths, a misunderstanding. We can work this out privately. Family doesn't beat family bloody over real estate, Thomas replied stonily. The next hour passed in a blur of police officers, paramedics, and questions. I could barely focus enough to answer. I was loaded onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask placed over my face. As they carried me out, I glimpsed Daniel and Vanessa in separate police cars, both speaking animatedly to officers. Thomas stood on the porch, still holding his phone, talking to a detective. At the hospital, the full extent of my injuries became clear. 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, facial fractures around my right eye socket, and a 4-inch laceration on my scalp that required 20 stitches. My body was a canvas of bruises, especially across my torso, where Daniel had kicked me repeatedly. The doctor mentioned internal bleeding they needed to monitor and possible nerve damage in my left hand, which had been crushed under Daniel's heel when I tried to shield my face. I was admitted for observation and treatment. The white hospital room, with its antiseptic smell and constant beeping of monitors, became my world for the next 4 days. Police detectives came to take my statement and photographs of my injuries. They informed me that Daniel and Vanessa had been arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including aggravated assault and attempted coercion. Alicia arrived within hours of my admission, her face stricken when she saw my condition. "Oh my God, Carla," she whispered carefully, taking my uninjured hand. "I knew he was escalating, but this is monstrous." She stayed with me as much as the hospital would allow, bringing my phone charger, comfortable pajamas, and updates from the outside world. It was through her that I learned Thomas's video had been instrumental in contradicting Daniel and Vanessa's initial claims of self-defense. "They tried to say you attacked them first," Alicia told me, indignation clear in her voice. "But the video shows everything. Daniel throwing you down, kicking you, Vanessa, telling him to end you. It's all there." Aunt Susan visited on the 3rd day, tearfully apologizing for believing Vanessa's lies about me manipulating Dad. "I should have known better," she said, placing a small potted plant on my nightstand. "Your father always said you were his rock. I'm so sorry I doubted you." Physical pain was constant, but the emotional trauma was worse. I experienced nightmares where I couldn't escape Daniel's rage, waking in panic with monitors beeping as my heart rate spiked. The hospital psychologist diagnosed acute stress disorder and warned it might develop into PTSD without proper treatment. The most difficult part was reconciling the brother I'd grown up with the one who had once protected me, with the man who had nearly killed me over money. When I closed my eyes, I saw his face transformed by rage, felt the impact of his boot against my ribs, heard Vanessa's cold instruction to end her. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Detective Marshall, a compassionate woman with silver-streaked hair, updated me regularly on the case. "They're not getting out on bail," she assured me. The judge considered them flight risks given their financial situation and the severity of the charges. Thomas's video evidence was damning. "What happens next?" I asked. "They'll face preliminary hearings, then probably go to trial unless they accept plea deals," she explained. "Either way, with the evidence we have, they're looking at significant prison time." The thought of returning to the house where the attack had occurred filled me with dread. Each time I pictured the dining room, I saw blood on the hardwood floors, felt the impact of my head against the wall. The home that had once represented safety now seemed tainted by violence. "I don't know if I can go back there," I confessed to Alicia the night before my discharge. "You don't have to decide right away," she assured me. "You can stay with me as long as you need." When I was released from the hospital, Alicia drove me to her apartment. My body was healing, but everyday movements were still painful. Simply walking from the car to her second-floor unit left me breathless and dizzy. The doctor had prescribed pain medication and arranged for physical therapy, warning that complete recovery would take months. That first night away from the hospital, lying on Alicia's pull-out sofa, I found myself wondering what Dad would think of everything that had happened. Would he regret leaving me the house if he knew what it would cost? The question haunted me as I drifted into uneasy sleep, pain medications blurring the edges of consciousness, but not quite erasing the memory of Daniel's rage-distorted face. The legal proceedings against Daniel and Vanessa moved forward with surprising speed. 3 weeks after the attack, still healing from my injuries, I testified at the preliminary hearing from a wheelchair. My face remained swollen and discolored, and I needed assistance to move from the witness stand to the evidence presentation area. Thomas's testimony followed mine. The courtroom fell silent as his video played on screens, showing the brutality of the attack in vivid detail. Even the court reporter paused, momentarily visibly affected by the footage. When Vanessa's voice clearly said, "Do it, Daniel," and her several jury members audibly gasped. Other witnesses came forward as well. My next-door neighbor described hearing shouting and thuds, then seeing me carried out on a stretcher. A colleague of Daniel's testified about his increasingly erratic behavior at work in the months before the attack, including overheard phone calls where he discussed needing money urgently. Most damaging was the financial evidence. Investigators discovered credit card statements showing Vanessa had accumulated over $100,000 in debt on luxury purchases, designer clothing, exotic vacations, jewelry. Daniel had attempted to cover these expenses through increasingly risky investments, most of which had failed. A foreclosure notice on their condo dated 1 week before the attack revealed they were 3 months behind on payments. During cross-examination, Daniel's attorney attempted to portray him as a devoted brother under extreme financial pressure who had momentarily lost control. The strategy backfired when the prosecutor presented text messages from Daniel's phone discussing various scenarios for forcing me to sell the house, dating back to the day after Dad's funeral. The courtroom dynamics shifted dramatically when Daniel broke down under questioning, blaming Vanessa for their financial troubles. "She kept spending no matter how many times I told her we couldn't afford it," he shouted, his composure finally shattering. "The credit card companies were calling every day. We were about to lose everything. I just needed my inheritance." Vanessa's response was immediate and calculated. Her attorney requested a separate trial, arguing that she was merely present during the assault and that her comment had been misinterpreted in the heat of the moment. When this motion was denied, her defense pivoted to portraying her as a victim of Daniel's manipulation and hidden rage issues. My client was afraid to contradict her husband, her attorney claimed. She feared becoming his next target if she intervened. This strategy collapsed when prosecutors produced Vanessa's text messages to Daniel in the weeks before the attack, including one that read, "If she won't sell willingly, we need to make her, whatever it takes." The judge's condemnation during sentencing was scathing. In 30 years on the bench, he stated, looking directly at Daniel, "The first. I have rarely seen such a calculated attack on a family member for financial gain. You betrayed not only your sister but the memory of your father who worked so hard to provide that home for both his children." Daniel received 8 years for aggravated assault and attempted coercion with additional charges of conspiracy and premeditated assault. Vanessa received 3 years as an accessory with the judge, noting her cold-blooded encouragement of violence against family. Permanent restraining orders were issued for both of them. As the bailiff led them away, Daniel looked back at me, his expression unreadable. Vanessa kept her eyes forward, her perfect posture maintained even in handcuffs. I felt no satisfaction watching them go, only a profound emptiness and lingering disbelief that we had come to this point. Outside, the courthouse reporters asked how I felt about the verdict. Justice was served. I replied simply, "But there are no winners here." With the trial concluded, I faced the decision I'd been avoiding, whether to return to the house. I had been staying with Alicia for nearly 2 months, my physical injuries healing slowly but steadily. The thought of returning to the scene of the attack still filled me with anxiety, but I also couldn't imagine abandoning the home Dad had worked so hard to maintain. Thomas and Alicia offered to help secure the property and prepare it for my return. "We'll make it safe," Thomas promised. "New security system, reinforced doors and windows. No one will get in unwanted." On a cold, clear Saturday, they accompanied me on my first visit back. I hesitated at the front door, my hand trembling slightly as I inserted the key. Stepping inside, I immediately noticed changes. The bloodstains on the hardwood floor were gone, the walls freshly painted. The furniture had been rearranged, breaking the visual memory of the attack. "We thought a different layout might help," Alicia explained gently, "less triggering." I moved through the rooms, slowly touching familiar objects, reacquainting myself with the space. In Dad's study, while searching for insurance documents, I found a handwritten letter in his desk drawer addressed to me and Daniel. The date showed he had written it just days before updating his will. "My dear children," it began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. I want you to understand my decisions about our family home. This house represents more than property to me. It's where I raised you both after your mother left, where we became a complete family despite being incomplete. Carla, your dedication to this home, and to me, in my final years, has demonstrated your understanding of what this place truly means. Daniel, your path has taken you elsewhere to success I'm proud of, but also to different values. I hope you will both respect my wishes and find peace with them. Remember that what matters most is not what we own, but how we care for each other." Finding Dad's letter felt like a confirmation. Despite the trauma associated with the house, I knew I needed to reclaim it rather than abandon it. I decided to start with the kitchen, Dad's favorite room, where we'd spent countless hours cooking together. The cabinets were original to the house, sturdy but dated. With Alicia's help, I selected a new color scheme and modern hardware, keeping the vintage charm but making the space feel renewed. The renovation became unexpectedly therapeutic. Each decision about paint colors or cabinet pulls helped me reclaim ownership of the space. Thomas assisted with the physical labor, teaching me basic carpentry skills as we worked. His quiet presence was reassuring, his practical approach to security making me feel safer. The most significant change was a comprehensive security system Thomas helped install. motion sensors, camera monitoring, automatic lights, and a direct alert to the local police station transformed the house into a fortress. "No one's getting in here without you knowing," Thomas assured me. My neighbors formed an unofficial protective network, exchanging phone numbers and agreeing to watch for unusual activity. The community support was overwhelming, with people I barely knew offering assistance and expressing outrage over what had happened. Gradually, the house began to feel like mine again, the memories of violence receding as new positive experiences accumulated. I hosted a small dinner party for those who had helped me, filling the dining room with laughter for the first time since the attack. Looking around at these people who had stood by me, I realized I had found a different kind of family, one built on choice rather than blood. 6 months after the attack, my physical recovery was mostly complete. The broken ribs had healed, though they still ached during cold weather. The scar on my scalp was hidden by my hair, and the nerve damage in my left hand had improved with physical therapy, though I occasionally dropped things when tired. The external wounds had mended, but the emotional healing proved more complex and nonlinear. I continued weekly sessions with Dr. Olivia Chen, a trauma specialist who helped me navigate the psychological aftermath. The nightmares had decreased in frequency, but still occurred, especially during stressful periods. Certain triggers like unexpected knocking on the door or the sound of angry male voices could send me into panic attacks that left me shaking and hyperventilating. Recovery isn't a straight line. Dr. Chen reminded me during one particularly difficult session after I'd had a panic attack at school when a parent raised his voice in the office. "You'll have setbacks, but they don't erase your progress." On her recommendation, I joined a support group for survivors of family violence. The first meeting was intimidating, sitting in a circle with strangers, but as others shared their stories, I recognized echoes of my own experience, the disbelief that loved ones could cause such harm, the struggle to reconcile past happy memories with present trauma, the challenge of rebuilding trust. Lisa, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s, became a particular friend within the group. The hardest part, she told me over coffee after one meeting, is accepting that you didn't cause their behavior. Nothing you did or didn't do made them choose violence. Her words resonated deeply. I had spent months replaying scenarios, wondering if different choices might have prevented Daniel's attack. If I had agreed to sell, if I had been more understanding of his financial struggles, if I had recognized the warning signs sooner, could I have avoided the trauma? "Your brother made his choices," Dr. Chen emphasized when I shared these thoughts. "Adult behavior is never the victim's responsibility." Working through these feelings, I began transforming Dad's old workshop in the backyard into an art studio. I had dabbled in painting during college, but abandoned it when life became busy with work and Dad's illness. Returning to art became another form of therapy, allowing me to express emotions too complex for words. The first painting I completed was of the house, as I remembered it from childhood, golden with afternoon light, Dad working in the garden. I hung it in the entryway, a reminder of what the home had been and could be again. As spring arrived, I made another significant decision. I would use part of the house for community classes. The formal dining room we rarely used became a classroom where I offered free art lessons to children from the school where I worked. Filling the space with children's laughter and creativity helped exorcise the final ghosts of the attack. I also had to address the financial aspect of Daniel's inheritance. Following Jessica's advice, I established an escrow account for Daniel's share of the house value, making regular deposits as outlined in Dad's will. Though he had forfeited any moral claim to the inheritance, I was determined to fulfill my legal obligations. The payments would continue whether he was in prison or not. One summer day, I received a letter from the prison where Daniel was serving his sentence. For a long time I left it unopened on the counter, uncertain whether I wanted to read his words. Finally, I took it to a session with Dr. Chen, opening it in the safety of her office. Carla Daniel had written in his precise handwriting, "I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. Prison has given me time to reflect on how I became someone capable of hurting my own sister. I take full responsibility for my actions and the pain I caused. I understand if you never want to hear from me again, but I needed you to know that I am truly sorry." The letter continued with details of his therapy programs and sobriety in prison, but included no excuses or attempts to minimize his actions. Dr. Chen helped me process my complicated feelings about this unexpected apology. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she advised. "An apology doesn't obligate you to respond or forgive." After much consideration, I decided to visit Daniel once 6 months after receiving his letter. The prison visiting room was stark and uncomfortable, but I needed this conversation for my own closure. Daniel looked different, thinner, and subdued the designer clothes replaced by a prison uniform. We spoke through a partition, his eyes frequently dropping from mine in shame. "I meant what I wrote," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not sure I can give it," I replied honestly. "But I wanted to tell you in person that I'm selling the house." His head jerked up in surprise. "Not because of what happened," I clarified quickly, "but because it's my choice now. I'm buying a smaller place closer to the school and using the remaining equity to establish a foundation in Dad's name, providing art therapy for trauma survivors." Daniel nodded slowly. He would have liked that. Yes, I agreed, he would. We talked for 20 more minutes, carefully navigating around the raw wounds of our shared history. Before leaving, I established clear boundaries. I would not visit again, though he could write occasionally if he continued his rehabilitation programs. There would be no relationship beyond this minimal contact until he had demonstrated sustained change, which would take years, not months. Vanessa, meanwhile, continued attempting manipulation, even from prison. Her letters, which eventually stopped when I never replied, alternated between portraying herself as a victim of circumstance and offering veiled threats about what might happen when she was released. I forwarded these to Detective Marshall, who added them to Vanessa's file for consideration during her eventual parole hearings. As my healing progressed, I developed unexpected new friendships. Thomas's son Mark, a kind-hearted architect visiting from Seattle, began helping with renovation projects around the house. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into something more personal. Unlike previous relationships, where I'd rushed into emotional commitment, Mark and I moved slowly, building trust carefully. "No timeline pressure," he said when we discussed his eventual return to Seattle. "Healing comes first. We'll figure out the rest as we go." This approach extended to other areas of my life as well. I enrolled in a master's program in education administration, taking control of my career advancement after years of stagnation. I worked with a financial advisor to secure my future, something Dad had always encouraged, but I had neglected. In the backyard, I created a memorial garden for Dad, planting his favorite flowers and installing a small fountain whose gentle burbling reminded me of his laugh. Sitting there on summer evenings, I often reflected on how he would view the events that had transpired after his death. I believed he would be sad about Daniel's choices, but proud of my resilience. Dad had always emphasized that true family is defined by actions, not blood, a lesson painfully reinforced by recent events. He would approve of the new family I was building around me, comprised of friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had demonstrated true care and support. When the house finally sold nearly 18 months after the attack, I felt ready to move forward. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children, exactly the kind of family Dad would have wanted to see enjoying the space. I gave them a letter detailing the house's happy history, the generations of children who had played in its rooms, the holidays celebrated, the love it had contained. I chose not to mention the violence, believing that chapter belonged to me, not to the house itself. My new home, a charming bungalow walking distance from the school, became a fresh start. Without conscious planning, I realized I had recreated elements of Dad's decorating style, his preference for comfortable furniture and warm colors. It wasn't about clinging to the past, but honoring what I'd learned from him about creating spaces where people feel welcome and safe. The foundation I established with the proceeds from the house sale, the James Reynolds Art Therapy Center, opened its doors exactly 2 years after Dad's passing. Watching trauma survivors find healing through creative expression brought meaning to the painful journey I'd experienced. Looking back, I realized that what Daniel failed to understand was that Dad's true legacy wasn't the house itself, but the values it represented: stability, safety, the importance of home as more than just property. In trying to claim the physical asset, Daniel had betrayed everything the asset symbolized. My healing isn't complete, and perhaps never will be entirely. There are still difficult days, triggers that catch me, unprepared moments when trust feels impossible. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending the trauma didn't occur. It means building something new around the broken places, creating meaning from suffering, and choosing how my story continues. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or trauma? What helped you find strength during that process? Share your experience in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about overcoming family conflicts and finding peace after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to write the next chapter of our own lives.